Is it working? Oh yeah, sorry about that. Right. Gonna do a video on the quality of gear that's out there. Now, just so people understand, there are obviously this farmer gear, then there's counterfeit and fake farmer gear, then there's unlicensed farmer gear, then there's UGLs, then there's homebrew. So what's the difference between them all? Well, farmer is farmer. You know, it's produced by a pharmaceutical company. It's produced to standards. It's checked. It's analysed. It has all sorts of safety protocols in place to ensure that the product you're getting not only is dosed correctly and is of the drug that you require, but has no contaminants or adulterants of any nature. Now, one thing that pharma companies do take a lot of time in getting rid of is stuff like heavy metals, which are produced when you create the hormone. Then you've got counterfeit and fake. Now, quite often, a lot of the counterfeit, you've got fake, which is just nothing. It's just a complete rip-off. There's a lot of this on the market. Now, this isn't done because they're trying to rip bodybuilders off. This is done because they're trying to infiltrate the commercial drug markets, i.e. they sell this shit to hospitals, they sell this shit to pharmacies. Big money, big markups, big organised crime behind it. And the counterfeit, it does have an active ingredient, but it's not the lab you think it is. So, you know, you get some organon sussed, and it will be sussed as in there, but it won't be organon. So you're basically effectively buying a UGL. Then you have labs that aren't fully licensed. Alpha Pharma was one of these. They had a lab, I believe, over in Thailand or somewhere over that area. It might have even been China, Singapore. And then they had a lab in India. Now, straight away, you know it's not a genuine pharma lab because it produced Trenbolone for human use, and Trenbolone is only available for veterinary use. But it did produce some products under license. So it was licensed for certain products and not other products. And then obviously, next one on our list is UGL, Underground Lab. Now, some of these are literally a guy in his back room with a very basic of materials, ordering his raw powders from China and producing gear. And some of these are quite well set up and have quite good control when it comes to hygiene, and use some fairly decent equipment. You know, some even use mag stirrers to try and remove some of the metals, etc., etc. And some don't. The actual basic process is quite simple. And then you've got your homebrew, which is literally a lad at home making his own. Now, it's big money. And as a result, obviously greed can play a part. I don't think any lab, well, no, I'll say not any, but most labs do set up and try and produce a genuine product. And, you know, I've seen some testing from Chem Clarity recently, which I got a lot of stick over, but he tests the test. And people can jump up and down when a lab comes back with underdose or incorrect dosing. But the thing is, what guys tend to forget is that the labs don't really have any way of checking raws. So it may not be the lab's fault. The lab may have genuinely tried to produce a good quality product, and they've been stiffed with the raw. The raw's coming from China. You know, it's not exactly, you can't go and see the product, and even if you went over and visited the lab you were buying the raws off and saw certificates of authentication and everything else, doesn't mean what they sent you 6 months later was the real thing. Obviously there is the element of greed, but there's also the element of customs. You know, you see, let's track the journey, okay? The powder's made in a lab in China. It's sent over here. It gets to the lab, and then it's used to produce the product. However, at some point it has to pass through customs. Now, if customs sees that product, then the lab suddenly hasn't got its raw materials. Now, if you're a lab producing, let's just argument say 10,000 vials a week, and your order gets stopped, what are you going to do? You've got a customer base wanting 10,000 vials a week. So you're going to turn around and say to them, sorry, I'm not making any for a week. I'm not making any for 2 weeks because I don't have the raws. Or you're going to make what you've got stretch for that 1 week just till you get your next order through. And I think most people in that situation would make it stretch because, you know, it's business at the end of the day. They've got a customer base and they know if they don't supply them, they're going to bugger off somewhere else. So, you know, poor quality drugs isn't always down to someone trying to rip you off. There are all sorts of influencing factors that play into this. And granted, there are those that do try and rip you off. And, you know, people will find, you may find this situation where for a week or 2 weeks they produce low quality because they've had problems with raws. But they then realise they get no feedback. They get no problems. They've got no issues. No one's complaining. So all of a sudden it's like, hang on a minute, we can still do this and double the profit we're making. So you can see the temptation. Doesn't mean it's right, but it happens, you know. People are greedy. There's all sorts of influencing factors can affect the quality of your drugs, particularly when it comes to dosing. Now, you will get situations where, you know, there's your trend's only got 50% of what it should have in trend and the rest of it's topped up with test and stuff like that. Now, for blokes, not too much of an issue really. Yeah, all right, you're not getting what you pay for, but it ain't going to cause you any real major issues physically. May find you have a few, your issue management's not working as good as you thought it would, but, you know, that's really about what you're going to get. Females, though, a whole different ballgame. Now, Tren is quite a popular drug with women. Low dose, but it is quite a popular drug. Now, if you're finding out that Tren's 50% test, that's going to have some virilization effects that women did not bargain for. So, you know, there can be some serious consequences. Now, there's all sorts of studies being done and various fact-finding. And I suppose, in a way, it depends on what your threshold is for underdosing. I mean, I'm actually surprised labs get it as close as they do, considering the way the stuff's manufactured and the fact that they can't test the raw for the quality that's coming in. And most of your top labs, especially with stuff like test, are pretty much bang on the money. They're pretty close. For some reason, EQ tends to be overdosed. Most of the labs I've seen testing for EQ is either where it should be or it's above, sometimes by as much as 30%. The big problem here is your expensive drugs, Tren and Masteron. Quite often see those adulterated with other drugs, or you see them underdosed. And like I said, you can never say if it's down to the lab trying to make more money, or it's down to the fact that the raws that came in just weren't up to scratch. Putting a figure on it, I think if you looked at saying that your limit was 2% either way, so you'd allow 2% over, 2% under, then I think you'd be looking at anywhere between 60 and 80% of what's out there doesn't match the label. And I'd say probably 30, maybe a bit more, just completely isn't what it should be. It's just complete utter garbage. Excuse me, pouring coffee. Now, the other thing you got to remember with testing is that it's a snapshot. It doesn't indicate whether a lab is good or bad. It just indicates that that particular product at that particular time from that particular batch was good or bad. So, you know, you've got to take testing. You've got two choices here. You test what you're going to use, so you know for definite that what you're using is correct. or you go by reputation and you take the anecdotal evidence of large numbers of users. Unfortunately, large numbers of users haven't got a fucking clue. So it is a bit of a pain. The only way to be sure is to test what you're going to use. But just because one lab is good one week doesn't mean it's going to be good the next week or the next month or the next year, and vice versa. Just because one's bad one week doesn't mean it's going to be bad forever onwards. There will always be shitty labs, but with the best intention of the world, there will be labs that try to do the best and still have problems. I used to swear by precision. I think it was shit hot. And yet, I remember seeing some, unfortunately it wasn't on dosage, it was only on presence, but I remember seeing some tests that the products just weren't as they were labelled. There was other stuff in there. Now, where this becomes a bit of a problem is if someone uses a filter more than once, so say they've used a filter and filtered some trembolone, and then they use the same filter to filter some test, sorry, other way around, they filter some test, and then they use the same filter to filter some trembolone, then when you test that trembolone, it will show test in there. Now, it might be a minuscule amount, and unfortunately the testing I saw was only for presence of product, not for quantity. So it could be contaminated through a refilter use, or it could have been garbage. I don't know. So I've come to the conclusion that really the only safe way is to test everything you use, but then it makes it very expensive. So you've got to manage it, budget it the best you can, but in general you're pretty safe with your testosterones from the main brands that everybody knows, and everybody knows the reputations. The drugs that you need to look out for are those that are expensive. So obviously there's a lot of labs now starting to produce ment. Ment is very, very pricey, so there's one. Masteron, Trembolone, or any tren derivative, methyltren, whatever it may be. Anavar's expensive. And price will give you a bit of a guideline as well. Decent Anavar, you're probably looking at a wholesale price of about 30-35 quid. So if anyone's retailing you Anavar at 30-35 quid, you've got to start questioning either that guy is a good mate of yours and you're getting a really good deal, or it isn't what it's supposed to be. The raws cost, and though price isn't always the best indicator, definitely something being too cheap is a good indication that it's shit. Now some guys just don't care, but you know, my question, if it's shit, what else is in there? That would be what I'd be concerned about. None of the gear I've seen UGL wise has ever been particularly pure, and quite often I've seen it come back with 2 or 3 other compounds in there. They're trace elements, and you know, generally not the end of the world, but they're still there. And again, like I say, I think most of these problems actually originate from the raws. I don't think many of the top labs go out to deliberately rip people off, because it's bad for business. You know, labs rely on their reputations in order to sell their product. Now, what does happen from time to time is that a manufacturer will come up with a name for a lab and they'll produce pretty decent stuff. They'll do that for 6 months till they get a reputation for producing good stuff, and then they'll start producing garbage for a further 6 months. It's about how long 3 to 6 months is about how long it takes to wreck that reputation, and for those 6 months it'll be absolutely shit and they'll make a fortune, and then they'll rush a new lab and produce good stuff again, and this cycle continually repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself. But it happens in old drug markets. It happened in the E-market. You know, a lab would produce good shit. Once they got a name for it, they just start producing garbage then. And you've got to remember as well that UGLs get copied by other UGLs. So there are fake versions. I remember Prochem years ago had loads of problems because someone else had started producing a fake version of Prochem. Now certain labs appear to have gone through to massive amounts of effort to make their products secure. They've put batch numbers or codes, they've put holograms, They've got websites where you can confirm that the code represents the drug. But as far as I can see, if I copy the code on the product I'm doing, then it will still show up on the website as being correct. So I'm not too sure how that's going to stop people from counterfeiting a UGL. UGL's used name as pharma and pharmaceutical this and pharma that, and it's just a name, it's just marketing, it's just advertising. They're not pharma. But that doesn't mean that UGL are crap. There's good labs out there. Currently, to be honest, I haven't got a clue. One of the dangers not using for so long, I've sort of dropped off a little bit of what's good and what's not good. But I hear good reports about most of the main ones, so I'm not going to start naming them because everybody knows who they are anyway. And the thing is, it's also geographically based, so overseas people that watch this crap, they will probably never even heard of some of these labs, so it's not really relevant. Excuse me. That's about it really, guys. It's your bodies, it's your choices. If you can afford it, a test. If you can't, then at least go for one that you're hearing lots of good feedback on. And you tend to find that new labs are always pretty good. It's 3-6 months into it when they start to get a bit shit. So, and like I say, don't automatically assume because a product's not good that it's down to the lab trying to rip you off. Some things are out of their control. Right, this has ended up being quite a long video, so I'll shut the fuck up and get off now. Okay.